This happened years ago, but the thought of it still keeps me up at night. I was walking through the hills of a provincial park with my dog during winter, so the sun set much faster than I'd expected and before I could get back to my car. Once the sun was well and truly gone, all you could see was darkness. I was walking slowly through a dark field when, out of nowhere, I had to this day the most gut-wrenching, undeniable feeling I was being watched. I turned around to check, only to see in the distance a figure standing there, somehow darker than the area around us. The instant I saw this person, my stomach dropped and my body froze in place. I knew in that moment he was coming for me. I grabbed my dog's leash and we booked it. I mean sprinting, full-on speed up and down the hills, around the trees, down embankments. I was running so fast, it was as if my life depended on it, and to this day I'm sure it did. I made the 30 to 40 minute trip in about 15 minutes. All that stood before me in my car was this switchback you had to go back and forth up if you want to reach the top. Once again, I gave it all that I had, running up as fast as I possibly could. When I reached the top and looked back down for a moment, I could see the person behind me chasing after me. Did he go up the switchback like how any sane person would? No, of course not. He started sprinting right up the middle, headed straight for me. I screamed at him to fuck off, but he didn't say anything, not a single word, just running full sprint right towards me. I was lucky my car was at the top of the hill. As I ran towards it, just like in horror movies, I stumbled over something and dropped my keys. I was fiddling with them, trying to open the door before he arrived. Just in time, I managed to get it open, throwing my dog in and slamming the door behind me, just as the man reached us. Best part is, as I looked around, there were no other vehicles parked anywhere around us, so where had this person parked? As I looked to the side, I could see they'd parked right next to me, of all places. This guy jumped into his truck so fast. To this day, I've never seen a better example of speeding out of there like a bat out of hell. I mean, he slammed on the engine so hard, black smoke jetted out of the back as he swerved out of the lot, leaving skid marks on the ground behind him. I sat in the back of my vehicle for hours afterward, shaking and crying, knowing I was this close to whatever he had planned for me. That's why I share this story, in hopes that people won't ignore that sort of gut feeling, that voice in the back of your head that tells you to run. If I did that day, I never would have noticed him in time and would not have had the head start I needed to escape. Always trust your gut feelings and intuition. It really might be the deciding factor on if this is your final day on Earth or not. I'm of the mindset that everyone should know a little bit about cars. I've always been mechanically inclined, and I think that may have saved me this time. I was using dating apps a few years ago. Met this guy, he seemed super nice. We talked for a few weeks before I was willing to meet with him. His dad owned a local gun store where I would get most of my target stuff. I used to be in a women's league for competition shooting. I had seen this guy around before because of this, and had a fairly decent impression of him. I still wanted to be safe though. He invited me out to a concert at a local town site. It was a concert I really wanted to go to, and I figured it would be safe as well. It was at a well-known place with a lot of security. I let him pick me up because he had talked about mechanics and cars, and wanted to show me his Mustang. He liked to brag about how well he kept it running and how much he babied it. I was into time trial racing at the moment, so I was interested to see what he had done on it. He picked me up and we started heading to the event. Right before the exit, he said his car was suddenly acting funny. I was watching the dash though. If you've been in racing, you know our cars and trucks usually have extra accessories. Whether it's aftermarket racks and gauges or switches, there's usually something aftermarket inside the car. As I looked though, I noticed there was nothing extra. The car felt like it was shifting correctly. There was no shudder or noise, nothing to indicate any problems at all. I thought that was fairly weird. All I said was that we should try and limp it on over to the concert venue. It was less than a mile away now, and it was better than being stuck on the I-15. He agreed and drove us very carefully the last mile. We get to the concert, and things were okay-ish. He kept on watching me and buying me drinks the whole time. I refused to drink though. Every time he gave one to me, I would make up an excuse and go to the bathroom and flush it. He kept making comments about how well I was handling the alcohol, and I was getting super weirded out. The concert ended and it was finally time to leave. For context, this particular event happened at the local reservation town site. At the time, the res did not have great self-service, so I couldn't get a hold of anyone to come get me. I decided to bite the bullet, and I talked him into taking the old highway instead of the 15. It sounds a bit silly, but when you take that old highway, even though it's slower, people seem more willing to stop and help you than they are on the freeway. I figured if he really was having car troubles, it would be a lot safer. Plus, we wouldn't have people flying around us at 80 miles per hour. We made it about halfway between the town site and our town, when he said the car was acting funny again and pulled over. I was stone cold sober still though, and didn't notice anything wrong. When I got out of the car to check it out with him, he started making comments about how I was so drunk and I should just wait inside. He even explicitly said, "It's safer because you can't trust drunk Indians, especially with a little girl like you." This dude had no idea that I was actually native myself. I just happened to be kind of pale. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up, so I checked my phone. Just barely got a bit of service. I started to text my dad. As I was walking away from the engine compartment, I noticed that instead of looking at the car, he was now watching me. I started acting like I was trying to get cell service to get help. Out of the very corner of my eye, I saw this man take the spark plug wires off the distributor cap and switch the order. Your spark plug wires connect to the distributor cap based on the order your cylinders fire in, so doing this will either make the car run terribly or not even be able to turn on at all. I managed to send my dad a picture of what he was doing, and my dad told me to start walking. As I started to walk away, the man hopped back into the car and opened his glove box, which exposed the pistol lying within. He told me not to worry and said we would be perfectly safe. I broke a world record for how fast I was texting my dad. He said to start walking and to tell the guy that he was already on his way and that our friends lived just up the road. So that's exactly what I did. I started walking with a purpose and took off as quickly as I could. The man was yelling and starting to chase after me, but I yelled back that the wind was too loud and I couldn't hear him. I said I'd be back with our friends in a moment. I was scared out of my mind though. We were 10 miles out of town with no one around. The closest road actually led to a cemetery, so no one was around to help me. I got a really bad feeling the farther I got from the car. I turned around and looked. The hood was now closed and the lights were on. I decided to hide in the farm irrigation next to the road. I kept walking towards town crouched down and texted my dad what was happening. I heard a car slowly come up behind me. Then I saw a flashlight. I pressed against the side of the ditch and waited for the lights to pass by. Once I couldn't hear anything else, I crawled out and kept walking amongst the weeds. My dad texted me that he saw me, so when he pulled up, I ran to his truck. As we made our way back towards town, we passed by that dude, and he was now surrounded by 3 cop cars. My dad told me not to worry much about what happened. I heard through the grapevine later he had been charged with violent crimes in the past, and he had been arrested that night for concealed carrying without a permit. The police never talked to me, but I haven't seen that guy in town ever since. If I didn't have experience with cars and didn't know what he was doing, I could have been dead in that ditch instead of hiding. Most communities have places where you can take basic car care and maintenance courses. I highly recommend everyone take them and at least know the basics. This dude knew I knew cars, but his whole goal was to get me so piss-ass drunk I wouldn't realize what was happening. Luckily, his fake car troubles didn't fool me. When I was 23, I rented an apartment in an old boarding house in a neighborhood just outside the sketchy downtown of a mid-sized southern US city. One night at around 2 a.m., I was driving home from my boyfriend's place after we'd had a huge fight. I was teary and not paying much attention to my surroundings. At a stoplight, I pulled up alongside the only other car on the road and made brief eye contact with the driver. I gave him a quick, absent-minded smile. I'm Southern, it's ingrained. Anyway, I guess he somehow took that momentary interaction as some sort of invitation. At the next stoplight, he stared into my car with this weird blank expression. The next, and the next. I was seriously uneasy. It took me a while to realize he was actually now following me. I guess I should have just driven to a police station, but this was in the era before smartphones. I didn't know where the closest one was. I was also exhausted. I thought I was just being paranoid, I guess, and didn't want to make too much of a fuss. Instead, I circled around out of my way until I no longer saw his headlights behind me. It seemed like he'd finally gotten bored and veered off. I was beyond relieved because of this and drove straight home, anxious to just get inside and behind locked doors. I parallel parked in a tight spot between two cars on the street outside the boarding house and cut the engine. That's when the guy's car pulled in out of nowhere right up alongside me, close enough to the driver's door that I couldn't have opened it if I tried. Now I was completely blocked in, and he knew where I lived too. I briefly thought about climbing across and exiting by the passenger door, but I wasn't confident I could outrun him to my house and get it unlocked before he grabbed me. It was very much the vibe he was throwing off. I fumbled around and tried to fish out a phone from underneath my seat. He got out of his car and lazily walked around to the passenger side of mine and tried to open the door. Finding it locked, he leaned down and stared at me with that same intent, dead-eyed expression. He started to tap on the glass. I finally got my phone open and yelled that I was calling the police as I dialed 911. He began to bang on the window, then slammed his fist on the windshield like he was going to try and break it. He stopped cold in place and stared for a minute more while I talked to the dispatcher, looking utterly disappointed in me. I don't clearly remember the end of this interaction. It was a long time ago and I was completely terrified, trying to give information over the phone. I remember though having the impression that he was making a mental note of the house, and he seemed entirely confident as he ambled back to his car and unhurriedly drove away. The cops came and took my statement, and didn't seem to like what I told them one bit. If they found him though, no one ever let me know in the end. I lived there for a few more months after, and didn't get a single solid night's sleep. At 20 years old, I found myself a single mother to a newborn baby boy. Around the same time, a relative was having trouble out of their tenant, who rented a mobile home they owned out in the country. Eager to have my own space for me and my baby, I jumped at this opportunity. I didn't have a car at the time, so I got dropped off at the trailer with mine and all of my baby's belongings. The route there was a long, old country road, with a lot of farms and long stretches of fields. Then you made a left turn into a neighborhood of a stretch of brick ranch-style houses. That went on for about a mile until the houses stopped altogether. The road kept on going another quarter of a mile down a steep hill, only to come to a sudden dead end. The dead end is where that mobile home sat, totally secluded. Admittedly, I was a bit afraid, being by myself out there with my baby, especially at night. The one dim streetlight shining down, surrounded by woods, only served to make the area look more creepy. You would never be able to actually see if anybody was out there lurking unless they stood directly under it. The rent was dirt cheap though. I had set up a nursery and the place wasn't too shabby. After settling in, I decided to take advantage of the stretch of road and start going for walks and pushing my baby in the stroller. We would walk all the way up past all of the brick houses and back out onto the main road, then turn around and walk back down to our trailer. One of those days we were out walking, heading back down the hill, when I saw him, a tall, dirty, freakishly lanky man in tattered, filthy clothing, standing amongst the tree line, kind of hunched over. He was staring right at me and just swaying back and forth. I hesitantly waved, but he just kept on staring instead of reacting. Instead of heading directly back down to the trailer, I turned around and made another lap back up to the main road. Whoever this guy was, I didn't want him to know I lived there all alone. I walked slowly on my way back down. Thankfully, he was gone by the time I got home. I went inside and locked the door. I had an unsettled feeling for the rest of the night, though. The next day on our walk, we walked up to the main road. On the way back down, I saw the man again, walking in my direction. I felt my heart pounding as we approached one another. I started to veer off to the other side of the road to avoid him, but he mimicked my movements and walked right up to me. I noticed he wasn't actually as old as I'd initially thought, probably only 45 at most. His rough appearance made him look much older though. He was wearing a worn-out navy blue-looking work uniform, something a mechanic would wear. He was beyond skinny, beyond dirty, and his teeth were so rotten they were black and barely clinging on to his discolored gums. His nails were creepy and nasty, his eyes were bloodshot, and one looked weirdly swollen. "What's your name?" he asked, standing in front of me. For some reason, out of pure shock I guess, I told him my real name. At once, he nodded and started walking again, as if that's all he'd wanted to know. I noticed he had a name badge on though, that said Jermichael. I walked back down slowly, frequently looking behind me. I saw him cut between two brick houses and disappear into the woods. Some time went on with no sign of the man reappearing, but I hadn't forgotten that he was still out there. Eventually, I did get a little car. I was on the way back from getting groceries one day when I accidentally missed the turn into the neighborhood. I pulled into the next driveway a little ways down to turn around. It was a narrow gravel driveway surrounded by woods, not exactly the best place. I drove until I came to a clearing littered with beer cans and garbage. In the middle of this clearing was a small white house that looked like it should have been condemned. Sitting there on the porch was none other than Jermichael. He stood up and stared for a minute, then started to walk down the steps. I whipped my car around and sped out of there. The living situation I witnessed was unexplainably shocking. I honestly felt a bit bad for him. That night, I laid my sleeping baby in his crib in the nursery and went and showered. As I walked back to the other side of the house to check on the baby, I had to walk past the back door. If you've ever lived or been in a trailer, it was one of those metal doors with a diamond-shaped window at the top. There was nothing covering this window. As I walked by, I tried not to look, but out of my peripheral vision, I could see a face in the window. I knew it was him. I ran into the nursery, my heart beating into my neck. I slammed the door closed and got down on the floor beside my sleeping baby's crib. My cell was the only phone in the house, and it was in the bathroom. There was silence. Then I heard a dreaded knock on the front door. A chill went through me, and I was frozen with fear. Another knock, and suddenly my mind started working. He's been watching me for months. He knows I'm here, I thought to myself. I was afraid if I didn't do anything, he would try to force his way in. I got brave and walked to the door. "Who is it?" I yelled. "It's me. Open the door," he said calmly but sternly. "No, please go away." I screamed at the top of my lungs as tears started pouring from my eyes. I heard the sound of him scraping something against the door, and panic started to set in. I remember feeling so helpless. I ran and grabbed my phone. This was the first time I'd ever called 911. By the time the police got there, of course he was gone. They told me they were already aware of previous bad behavior from him, but since he didn't technically do anything to harm me, there wasn't much they could do. That's usually how it went with him. I spent a few nights at the trailer after that, and soon moved out. It's been 7 years now, and I still have terror-filled flashbacks of that night. I wonder what he would have done if I'd opened the door, or if I hadn't called the cops. I wondered just how often he watched me. The following events took place over the space of a year. It took me a while to link them all and realize what was happening. I'm going to try and relay it as I experienced it. I'm 31 now, but this took place when I was roughly 18 to 20 years old. For the majority of my career, I've been a support worker. This involves supporting adults with learning disabilities or health issues in their own homes and out in the community as well, basically with all and any aspects of their lives. The job does involve long hours and often sleepovers or waking nights. In this case, the two other staff members went home at around 8 to 10 p.m., depending on if the service users were overnighting at their parents'. This was a regular occurrence. The sleepover would stay with the remaining clients in case they had a health concern or needed support with something overnight. At the time, I was working in service with 3 young men who were very active within the community. This meant I was also very active in their community, out and about all the time, helping them to, from, or during college and work. We rode the bus a lot because they had concession passes. I live in the UK and can't drive, so I commuted to and from work on public transport. The service we worked in was based across the road from a nursing home, or possibly a respite center. To this day, I'm unsure what it actually was. This building had parking spaces outside it intended for that facility, but after certain hours, anyone was allowed to use them. I noticed eventually that at 10 p.m. every night I was on shift, whether I was a sleepover or just finishing for the day, a car would park right across the street from us and shine its high beams right through our window. This would also light up the adjacent front door, so anyone interested could see who was leaving. Even though the clients were in bed by this time, there was still a lot to do for the remaining staff member, like ensuring the property was secured and the fire doors throughout the house were closed. General health and safety concerns. Because of this, a car across the road blinding our staff as they left was low down on the list of concerns. Personally, I first assumed it was just a facility staff member going home. This went on for a few months before one eagle-eyed colleague told me this only ever happened on days when I came into work. We made a joke about how I had a fancy man picking me up or something, but I mostly wrote it off as nothing. Whilst out and about with the people I supported, they would often say things like, "Hey, that man is looking at you." My service users were mostly young men who liked to joke and had limited mental capacity. Often, their jokes didn't seem like jokes but were intended as such. Because of this, I didn't really take much note of it. This started with one client specifically, actually. I worked with him more than the others because I was his key worker, which meant I had additional duties relating to that client, such as arranging special outings or events. Before long, though, every single one of them was telling me there was a man who was staring at me and following me. They often said this in crowded public areas, and because they struggled to communicate, they could never fully describe what was going on. One of them, though, said it was always the same man. They could only give vague, odd details, which we pieced together into a wider description. Again, the other staff found it odd this behavior was only directed at me. They never said this to anyone else, though they did say it in the presence of other staff if I was part of the group. The big event, though, had such an impact that I still don't use public transport for anything. I got a call from the mother of the person I was supporting that day. He had earlier gone for a visit to his parents, and his brother was home for uni. They decided he would sleep over so he could spend the following day with his brother. It was 7:30 p.m. and quite dark because it was winter. I had worked over my contracted hours that month as we were short-staffed. I called our on-call manager, who offered me an early finish. I did all the admin CQC required to do daily, cheerily said goodbye to everyone before leaving to catch the 8 p.m. bus. It had been laundry day, so I had been ironing and hadn't eaten all the food I'd brought with me. I called my partner at the time because I had to pass through the city center. I decided to grab us some KFC and pick up the newest Game of Thrones book, which I had pre-ordered from Waterstones. I got off the bus wearing my headphones as per usual, picked up my book, walked down to KFC, got my food, and was on my way down the steps to the ticket barrier. Halfway down, though, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I had my hands full of chicken, so I turned, unable to take my headphones out. I saw a man who I assumed must be asking about which line he should be on or something. I tried to brush him off, but he followed me to the barrier. He even ran down the escalator to catch up with me. As I was sitting on the platform, he sat down next to me. It was quite late, and the people were sparse and spread out. It was super uncomfortable. He had all this space, and yet chose to sit right next to me. I took one of my headphones out because the man seemed to be quite angry with me now. He was rambling something. In a nutshell, I began to hear him tell me how he had seen me so often with different men, people I was supporting, I assume. Sometimes in a group of people much older. He said a lot of odd things which didn't register until I finally got home. He described my commute, including the times of my schedule, the clothing I would wear. He told me my hair seemed to change a lot. There was a lot looking back that indicated he had been watching me for a while. I was tired though and he was rambling. I wanted him to go away. He seemed inexplicably angry with me, saying he just wanted to look after me, but I'd only keep ignoring him. This was the first time I'd ever seen this man though. I can't remember how I responded exactly, but I basically told him he had the wrong person. It did freak me out enough that I changed lines and metros a few times. I was on the phone with my partner the whole time after I got on the metro. The man followed me, at first at a distance, but I guess eventually he lost track of me. He couldn't describe anything I did after the city center, so I think this was his first time really following me beyond my changeover from the bus to the metro. I did get safely home that night, but over an hour late with some cold-ass chicken. I told my manager about this and she gave me a personal alarm. I hadn't connected it to prior events yet though, so I just let it go thinking it was a one-off. I was not at work and only have a vague recollection about hearing about this last event. In fact, I had forgotten it entirely until a coworker at the time and a current friend reminded me. Two of my coworkers were upstairs sorting out the medications. They came down to find a man who we'd later find was my stalker. He was sat at the table. The guys we supported were all in their rooms, so the downstairs was empty. You can imagine they were quite shocked to see him suddenly appear. This was a secure place that protected vulnerable adults. Somehow he had managed to bypass multiple doors, all of which were locked and alarmed. He was just sitting there in silence, looking around the room. We could never figure out how he managed to get in, but he wouldn't respond to any of their questions. After a while of not seeing me there, he just got up and left without saying a single word. This obviously got reported, but nothing was really done about it. At the time, the other staff assumed he was an agency staff member who maybe had the wrong house and was meant to go to the other service a few doors up. He didn't present them with ID when asked though. Shortly after this event, I got offered a new job in a different city, meaning I left the area entirely for about 5 years. I now live back in the same vicinity but in a different area, with a different name through marriage. I look a lot different now too. I haven't seen the man again since. I don't know exactly how these events were connected, just that the exact same man was involved with every one of them. After the metro incident, I started getting taxis home instead because I was so afraid, which I still do if I'm out late.